Hey guys, welcome back to Baking with Becca. Today's bake is a 3-tier chocolate sponge cake sandwiched together with chocolate buttercream, covered in a white chocolate drip and decorated to the extreme. This cake is perfect for anyone who loves chocolate. So let's jump straight in with the chocolate sponge layers. Mix together the water and the coffee granules until smooth. Pour this into a saucepan and then add the butter and the chocolate. Make sure it's in smaller chunks, this makes it easier to melt. Put the saucepan on to a low heat. You need to keep stirring the entire time to make sure that the chocolate doesn't burn to the sides or the bottom. When it's completely smooth, leave it to one side so that it can cool down. Next up, sieve all of the dry ingredients into a bowl. Make sure there are no lumps. Remember to check out the description box below for all of the measurements. When you finish sieving and you're sure there's no lumps, just put this bowl to one side so we can use it later. Whisk together your buttermilk with your eggs. Put this to one side. This batter is quite wet, so you need to make sure you line the bottom of your baking tins. You can do this by drawing around the tin and cutting out the shape that you need. Slide them into the bottom of the tins and make sure that you grease the sides as well. Now we're ready to put the cake together. Pour your dry ingredients into a bowl and then add the mixed buttermilk and eggs. Add in half of the chocolate mixture and give it a stir. When it's combined, you can add in the remaining chocolate. Mix this until smooth and it's ready to go. I've measured the batter so that the exact same amount is in each tin, giving even layers. I've also put a bit to the side so that I can make cupcakes to decorate with. If you have cake strips, then your cake will come out flat. However, if you do not, then you'll need to slice off the top of your cake. The cupcakes are an optional decoration, so feel free to leave them out. Next, we're moving on to the chocolate buttercream. Beat the butter on a medium speed for at least 5 minutes. It needs to get much lighter in colour and increase in size. While it's beating, you can sieve the icing sugar and the cocoa powder into a bowl. You need to sieve it at least once to get rid of any lumps. Add half of the icing sugar mixture to the butter. You need to beat this for at least 5 minutes per half. It's best to do it in the smaller batches because the icing sugar tends to fly everywhere while it's beating. This saves a lot of mess and wasted ingredients. If you're really struggling with the icing sugar going everywhere, then you can try covering up using a tea towel, just as long as you're making sure to keep an eye on the whisks and make sure nothing's getting caught up. Add in your remaining icing sugar and beat this for another 5 minutes. Once the time is up, you can add in the vanilla and the milk. Don't add in all of the milk at once, add in half and then check to make sure it's the right consistency. It needs to be quite thick, but also spreadable. Keep mixing until you've got your desired consistency. Ideally, it should look like this. It's thick enough to hold its shape and it's smooth enough that it won't leave any bumps. Now we've made the buttercream, it's time to fill the cake and put on the crumb coat. For the filling, I'm starting with my bottom layer on top of a turntable. Using a piping bag, I'm just going to pipe a border around the edge of the cake. Once I've got my border, I'm going to fill the cake from the outside in using an even pressure to ensure that we have a flat layer. Use the turntable to turn the cake. This makes it easier for you to keep an even pressure on the piping bag. Level this off using an angled palette knife. Once you're happy with the filling, you can add your next layer of sponge. Make sure you're completely centering this layer of sponge on top of the bottom layer. Repeat the same process as we just did with the bottom layer, starting with a border around the edge of the cake and then working your way inward using an even pressure. Top this off with the final layer of cake, keeping it centered on the layer underneath. We need to crumb coat the cake to ensure that all of the crumbs are locked into this layer. Apply buttercream to the entire outside of the cake. Pay special attention to the area between the cake layers. There may be some small gaps which you can use buttercream to fill out. Make sure you're covering all of the sides, including the bottom. Next, you need to cover the top of the cake with a crumb coat. Spread buttercream over the top of the cake. Make sure that you're using the turntable. This is going to make it so much easier for you to cover the cake. Once you've completely covered the cake, it's time to strip it down so there's just a thin layer remaining. On the top, you can continue to use your angled palette knife to do this. For the sides, you're going to need a cake scraper. If you don't have one, then you can continue using a palette knife. However, using a cake scraper gives you much more even sides, as it is taller than the cake and it has more coverage than a palette knife. You can use quite a firm pressure on the sides and make sure you're removing all of the excess buttercream which is left over on your scraper. When you're done, you're going to put the cake back into the freezer for about 20 minutes. This will make it go completely hard and you'll be able to scrape off those excess bits of buttercream along the top. If you've decided to make the extra cupcakes for decoration on the cake, then you're going to need vanilla buttercream to top them off with. Beat your butter for 5 minutes. In a separate bowl, make sure you've sieved your icing sugar at least once. Add half of the icing sugar to the butter and beat for another 5 minutes. Once this is done, add in the remaining icing sugar and beat for another 5 minutes. Once that time's up, you can add in the vanilla and the milk. Use the same method as we did with the chocolate buttercream and make sure you're not adding all of the milk at once, just in case it becomes too runny. Beat this for another 5 minutes and it should be nice and light. The longer you beat it for, the whiter it gets. Now for the final coat of buttercream and the decoration on the cake. Start by covering the cake in a thick layer of buttercream. Make sure that you're covering the sides of the cake from top to bottom and ensuring there are no air bubbles. Once you've completely covered the cake in buttercream, it's time to get the scraper back out and take off a layer from around the sides. Whereas with the crumb coat, we used more of a scraping motion, this time it's to smooth the buttercream into shape. You should be taking off that top layer and ensuring straight sides. Moving on to the top of the cake, pile on the buttercream so that you've got a thick layer. You need to spread this to ensure you're covering the entire top of the cake. Once it's completely covered, scrape your palette knife and use it to go around and flatten it out. By applying pressure using the palette knife and using the turntable to spin the knife rather than your hand, this gives you a more even finish. You should leave your cake in the freezer for 15 minutes to harden it up before we do the chocolate drip. When you're ready, you can melt white chocolate in the microwave and combine this with a little bit of oil. Pour it directly on top of the cake and push it out so that it comes down the sides of the cake in a drip. For the border decoration on top, I'm using a closed star nozzle. Holding my piping bag still, I'm squeezing out buttercream until I see my desired shape. I'm doing this around the majority of the cake, but leaving space where I want the cupcakes to sit. I'm using the same nozzle for the cupcakes and just putting a bit of pressure in the middle and swirling around to create a rose. You can of course use any design you like, and it's a good idea to pop these in the freezer for 10 minutes as well, just to make sure that the buttercream is really hard on top. When you're done, you can decorate the cake however you like with the cupcakes and any chocolate that you've got. I used a little bit of melted chocolate to stick the decorations to the cake, just to make sure that they hold and don't fall off. This cake was designed to be a chocoholic's dream cake. So if you're a fan of chocolate, definitely give this a try or make it for someone else. Let me know how it goes and if you made any amendments or how you decorated it in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe for my next video.